Woohoo! And we're live once again on another Tuesday, and I have a person across the pond today, another Uplift Live person I met. I have Nathan here. So Nathan, before we get stuck in, can you tell people who you are and what you do? And then I will tell them what we're talking about today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a human being. My name's Nathan Whitbread, and I coach and I kind of do consulting and mentoring around neurodiversity in the workplace.
Oh, wonderful. That was nice, short, and sweet. So I will go ahead and put up our banner today. And we are talking about navigating neurodiversity on LinkedIn, the positives and the tricky bits. And I just love that title. I love that title. Nathan came up with that for us. And this is a topic I know nothing about. So I found it quite fascinating because this is something that's, part of LinkedIn. You think of it in the workplace, but I'm sure that it affects entrepreneurs as well. So this is, there's no prejudices. It's like neurodiversity is something that affects everybody, that can affect everybody in the population anywhere in the world. So actually, let's define the terms before we get stuck in, Nathan. So can you give us that kind of what do we mean when we talk about neurodiversity in the first place?
Right. So neurodiversity was a phrase that was coined by a woman called Judy Singer, who's an Australian, I believe. And when she originally coined it, she was talking about autism. That has, particularly in the UK, and I know in other demographics this hasn't quite happened yet, but it's happening slowly. It's now been broadened out really for a term that describes all of us, neurodiversity. We all think slightly differently. Now, within that, we have some of us that think slightly more differently, and we might describe them as neurospicy, neurodivergent. There's many terms, but there's kind of a more difference. And I guess that's the bit we're really interested in, but it kind of fits under this broad umbrella. And just to pick up on your comment a moment ago, Julian, about entrepreneurs, there's a lot of research that suggests as well that neurodivergent individuals are disproportionately represented within the entrepreneurial community for all sorts of reasons. And we can touch on that if that's useful.
That's very useful because, as soon as you said that, it popped into my head and it's like, I wonder if sometimes entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they don't feel comfortable in the traditional workplace and they kind of feel like mavericks. They feel they just have to go off and do their own thing. And I wonder if some of this factors in, and it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing. That's an interesting thought.
I think that's absolutely real. And as soon as you said Maverick, of course, I'm thinking of Tom Cruise in Top Gun. but you're right, because actually lots of organizations historically have had huge amounts of conformity around what they expect from people. And that just doesn't fit people that think differently sometimes. And it can be very difficult to fit into traditional workspace. It's not impossible, but can be challenging. And that can lead people to say, well, actually, I want to do something different. And I want to take my idea to market in a different way.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting. I like to think of like the old commercial that came out many years ago with Apple and Steve Jobs, and it was the Think Different. And that was kind of the whole thing about like when Apple came on the scene, their theme was thinking different, thinking outside the box, making a graphical interface that was beautiful. That was the whole idea. And he did think different. And so maybe if we go back and look at it, maybe Steve Jobs, is he an example of, actually, can you give us some examples of people that are famous that you would, that fit into this category?
I mean, not everyone is diagnosed, but I think so. One of the key things to talk about here is we've got diagnosis and traits, and the difference is that you can have traits of neurodivergent conditions, but to have a diagnosis, you have to go and see a medical professional, and they sign your ticket. Other thing to say that's really important is that co-occurrence or comorbidity, or whatever you want to say, is the rule rather than the exception. So if you've got some of this stuff, you're highly likely to have some other of this stuff. So that means that every time we meet an individual, they're unique, and the way this turns up is likely to be unique for them. And they are human, let's not forget that, because it's very easy to get all super medicalized and awkward. But anyway, answering your question quickly. So in the UK, we've got Branson. Mr. Musk probably fits into this category somewhere, I would argue. Again, you've got famous figures from history like Alan Turing, who is seen as potentially having some traits around this area. Einstein,
Mm.
along with many others. But they're just the sort of ones that immediately come at the top of my head. But this is part of the rich tapestry that makes us human. And if you've ever read anything by Malcolm Gladwell, I would
Yes.
argue many of these individuals fit into what we might call the outliers.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So let's start with the positives. What are the positives about all this, Nathan?
In terms of neurodiversity, I think there's huge numbers of positives and strengths in terms of seeing the world differently, often problem solving, often there's something about how you connect with what you're thinking about and what you're doing, and how you see the world. And coming back to why we're here to talk about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn can often be a good place for communicating that if it's done well. But that being told, there are also some challenges around that as well. And the very things that can be positive can also be challenging sometimes if we're not safe. And as we touched on our little pre-conversation, if we're not psychologically safe, actually, if it isn't safe enough for us to turn up warts and all and be honest about what's going on and how we're wrestling with stuff, it can make it really challenging to turn up like that.
And I like that, because I think that that's a really important part of LinkedIn. There are some people that come on the platform and they feel totally safe. They feel like can bare their soul. They feel like they're a champion, and they will just put anything out there. And other people will be nervous and say, I don't even know if I want to listen to this conversation, because people might see me listening to this conversation and then I'm going to be labeled. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think as a community of participants on the platform, we have a responsibility to not look away when we see things that aren't right. I think that's really important. But also, how do we engage with the difficult stuff with care? So, I mean, there's lots of tricky things going on in the world at the moment. We've got at least 2 wars, probably more, but 2 that are very visible. But even having a conversation about that and expressing some thoughts about that is a really dangerous space sometimes, because I think sometimes if you go into these spaces, there is a huge fear of being no platformed and not being able to actually talk about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, because you're fearful that it will be taken out of context, or you'll be seen as allying maybe with someone that, has broader views that maybe you don't agree with. But sometimes when you think differently, you might be thinking about it in a different way, and making sure you can create a space where you're able to have that conversation and to have a balanced conversation that isn't a ranting match is really, really important, I think. And to not be fearful of that happening, especially when you're new onto the platform, because I don't know what your experience was, Gillian, but when I first connected on LinkedIn, which is quite a long time ago now, I didn't do anything on it for ages. I was fearful to put my face on it for a while. And then suddenly we moved to this space where actually we're sharing our opinions, what we're thinking about, quite deep stuff and quite fun stuff as well, as we try and be ourselves on the platform. That takes a lot of work and a lot of journey. And if your experience has been negative in terms of how people have interacted with you, it can just really knock your confidence, not able to turn up authentically to do that stuff.
That's true. That's true. And we always have to remember that whatever we do, other people are watching, and I've always said that about anybody who's a job seeker. They may be commenting on posts and say, well, I'm not posting anything, I just comment, but your comments are visible. So somebody can literally go to your profile and look and see what you have to say about certain issues. And, what have they said in the past? And if their comments are all negative, that says a lot. So we do have to balance it with what are we okay with and what are we not okay with. And I know sometimes even too, I've had some people that have said, I'm going to post this on LinkedIn. And I've said, if I were you, I would sleep on it, because they were going to post something that they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to take back. And they were just heated in the moment. And I said, sometimes we just need to write to get stuff out, but not necessarily have it out for people to see. And that person said, thank you. They didn't post it the next day. So that.
And I think that's a big argument actually so one of the things that, if it's okay to talk about myself a bit on this, for me, posting on LinkedIn has been a big journey. And one of the things that I found really useful is actually to plan my content quite a long way in advance, because it means I can write in themes, I can really think about what's going on, and then to work with someone else to help me curate it, because I know that sometimes that seems like a dribble of thoughts, where actually if someone else can see where the story threads together, suddenly it becomes something quite useful and engaging.
Right.
Well, maybe it does. It feels like it's more useful and engaging than it was before. So I think there's something about the team bit as well, in terms of how to navigate some of the tricky bits of LinkedIn.
I like that. I like that.
Trying to do it all on your own is tough, isn't it, sometimes?
Yes, it is. It is. So as a coach, because you're actually, you coach, who are you coaching, Nathan? Are you coaching companies, working with individuals? You're working with management? Who do you go in and help?
Well, all of the above, basically. So obviously everything, one-to-one coaching is with an individual, be they an individual within an organization, or a leader within an organization, or someone senior. But also where the workers, that's where my work started, but it's broadened out really to look at teams and actually much more broadly at the organization, because quite often individuals aren't impacted by this stuff until they go into certain contexts. Because if you can control the environment, you can make it work for you, but organizations aren't always set up well for all sorts of reasons. So working around what are the things that need to change, ideally, to support the individual to be their most effective, whilst at the same time enabling the organization to work effectively, can be really useful. And what I found, Gillian, is quite often we take so much for granted in organizations, because that's the way it's always been done, without anyone really questioning why we're doing it that way. And yes, there was probably absolutely a really good reason why it was done that way in the beginning, but we need to now relook at it and say, well, actually, how do we make sure that this works for the people that are in this organization today? And those changes can often be quite painless, but incredibly effective, I'd argue, in terms of changing the way organizations work.
So based on what you know, what is like sort of one of the biggest challenges at an organization?
Around neurodiversity, I think there's something about being clear that we're dealing with human beings, and that sometimes the labels aren't helpful. It's really important we talk to the individual about what's going on with them, and what's going on with that specific team situation. I also think that sometimes, because some senior leaders have their own sort of different traits going on that they're having to manage, they can sometimes find it hard to then support other people who are more junior in the organization, because they're different to theirs, because we have to take off our mask of what we're dealing with in order to support someone else. So I think sometimes that can be really challenging, to help someone understand what's going on and what needs to be different around that. So I'd say that's the kind of biggest challenge that I see a lot. And linked to that as well is sometimes what we see is organizations think they're doing the right thing to help, but they're not really helping change the problem. There's this kind of idea, well, this is what we should be doing because this is what everyone's doing, as opposed to say, well, what's right for our organization, what's useful here, and what's going to be helpful here in terms of moving things forward.
Definitely. Well, that's great. So at this point, why don't I go ahead and pop over to our comments? We've been having some strange things with comments lately.
Really?
Yes, because it's like there's only 3, and that's not usual. That's not usual.
Jeff.
So we have Jeff, and he is on YouTube. The YouTube ones are working, but I don't think so much the LinkedIn. So Jeff is saying, finishing off the month of August with an interesting topic, Jillian. Nice to meet you, Nathan. So that's very nice. Yay, Jeff. And Jeff also hops over to LinkedIn. Greetings, Jillian and Nathan from Columbus, Ohio. I can't wait to hear about the tricky bits. Okay, so we'll get to some of that in a bit. And then we have the lovely John Asperian, who's coming in from YouTube today because LinkedIn's not letting him. So great to see Nathan get some sunlight sunlight on your show, Jillian. It was a pleasure to finally meet at Uplift Live. Yes, it was. It was so great that we were all able, and Nathan and I got to chat, and I almost got to Cambridge, and he was going to invite me in for a cup of tea, and that would have been nice.
The kettle is still on, you know.
Yes,
it's still on.
it's still on. It's still on. So let's get to the tricky bits, and let's talk about organizations with employees, but like, let's also talk about entrepreneurs too. So can you bring
where do you want to
in?
start? Where'd be the best place to start?
Why don't we start with the entrepreneurs, because we probably have more entrepreneurs joining us today.
So I think some of the tricky bits about the platform, I mean, if you talk about some of the neurodivergent, we haven't obviously touched on the conditions, but some of the conditions that are things like ADHD, which I'm sure lots of people are familiar with. So from what I've seen and some of the people I've worked with, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because LinkedIn can feed some of the things that aren't helpful, like the constant dopamine hits. Sometimes, you know, in terms of, and it can actually really draw you into something, particularly if you've got a lot of notifications turned on and you feel that need to automatically respond to everything. It can really start to cut into all sorts of parts of your life, especially around sleep and when you should be actually having some downtime to relax. So I'd say that is a really tricky bit to manage. And there's some stuff there. There's some stuff there about fear of missing out, as well, you know, as well as all those other things around, you know, what's going on while I'm not there, which can be really, really, really tricky. There's sometimes some stuff around how some content is sort of presented on the platform, because I think as we've worked hard to stand out, that has sometimes made content less easy to understand sometimes. So responding to it appropriately is tricky sometimes. And of course, if you've got any sort of visual impairment and stuff, it's sometimes really hard to engage with the non-text based content on the platform, especially with the use of images. Now, I'm a big fan, because I did a little bit of research earlier this year around alt text and why no one was using it. And there's quite a few advocates on the platform for image description, which I think is a great thing. I didn't really understand why, but after doing a bit of research, it's quite obvious, because the alt text that's being used on the platform doesn't really work because no one really uses it. So if anyone who's partially sighted, that's challenging. But it's also challenging for people that maybe just don't get what we're trying to illustrate by our images. So if we can actually describe what's going on in the image, that could be really helpful. And the best way I think to do that I've seen is just having a little image description. That's why it's there. It also helps you make sure you've made your point right, and actually the content you put out there is useful. So I think they're the key bits. There's also something around networking in terms of rules of engagement. I guess is probably a good way to describe it. What's a great way to start a conversation? Because we've got this blend of stuff, haven't we, on LinkedIn? We've got the people we know, who we've got a relationship with anyway, and then we've got the people we've just met. How do you do that effectively? You know, when you're, you know, when maybe you're finding it, when it's not an easy, natural thing for you to communicate in that way. So that you're not pitch slapping people, but you're actually starting an effective conversation to see where it goes. Because we don't know where the conversation is going to go till we have it. But unless you feel you've got the tools in your toolkit to approach that effectively, I think that, you know, it can be a really difficult space to be. So they're just a couple ones that come out. I don't know if there's anything that sort of jumps out at you, Jenny.
That's great. And and I would think that we also have to be, I know I'm always cognizant of how I'm having conversations with people privately. So that when we're talking in the DMs, I like to mirror whatever the person is, their preferred communication style. So if somebody likes to write text, I'll write a text back in a DM. If they like voice notes, I'll put a voice note, but then maybe a little bit of text so that I have the context, because voice notes are not my preferred method, because I get lost. I get lost in who said what and what did we say, and I have to go back and listen. It's hard. I love getting them, but it's not my preferred way of passing on information. But I think we have to always be cognizant of the other person, and are we doing something that's to their betterment than versus ours, and then figuring out how to do it all. So I think that interpersonal private communication is just as important as the public stuff.
I'd say it's probably even more important. I mean, certainly all of the, I guess, the things that have come out of LinkedIn for me as a business have been around DMs. It may have started with some sort of post, but it was a conversation that followed that was really, really important. And you know, and what you've said there really links back to some of the work I do in coaching, is like, how do we agree how we're going to do this? But on the LinkedIn platform, we're having to do that over and over again, and being sensitive and actually re-agreeing, saying, actually, you know what, it looks like I like audio, but I really don't. Can we, you know, and actually being honest about that? Because for personally, I find audio brilliant because I can do lots of messages really rapidly, because I can't spell for toffee, which you've probably noticed if you've been around any of my LinkedIn posts for a while. So it means there's not huge numbers of misunderstandings about misspelling and stuff like that. But I can talk quite well. So I remember I had to pick my son up the other night, and literally I had to pick him up from a concert. I was there at 11:30 at night, and I just literally just went through, I think, about 20 or 30 DMs, was able to respond to them really quickly in voice notes. But if I sat there typing it, it would just become, that would be a major mission for me in terms of time and energy.
Right. Right. And it's difficult because on the one hand, I like a personal, DM when somebody is sending me a voice note and says, "Hi, Jillian, I'm just, it's your birthday and I wanted to wish you a happy birthday." I love those. But if somebody sends me a proposal, like, I'd like to work with you to do a video, and they're giving me all the parameters for the video. I'm like, I can't deal with it. I can't deal with this in especially if it's like 6 DMs, and I'm like, because they're running out of time.
Well, this is the crazy thing about the platform, Jen, because if you use Slack, you dictate on Slack, it automatically transcribes it for you.
Oh, why can't we have that? Well,
exactly. And there's probably other Microsoft platforms that do it already. So what's going on? I thought the benefit of that surely the bigger entities that we get, and you've got, Microsoft also own Nuance, the manufacturer Dragon, probably the market leader in, audio to text translation. Right. So what's going on here?
Well, and we know that LinkedIn can excel in some things, like the audio events. I love that the audio events very, very quickly produce closed captioning, so that we can turn that on or we can turn it off. So that to me is when you empower people, when you give people multiple choices on how we can, basically engage with the content based on our own experience. And for some people, seeing captions go across the screen, they would be like, this is overload. I can't stand this. For somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, they would say, if I didn't have that, I couldn't go to the audio room. So two different people, two different ways of consuming that content. But if we have the closed captioning in an audio room, then that technology, it exists on LinkedIn, right?
Exactly. So you've got a whole product development thing going on there, which I'm sure there's wiser people than us will know exactly what's going on to stop that happening.
And we're hoping they're listening. We're hoping that the good fairies are listening, and they're going to go back and create some LinkedIn magic. Yeah,
because I think the message is, I think the platform's got a huge amount of potential, as we know. Yes, it's got teething problems. Yes, it's got to make money. We understand that completely. And we understand that we're the product that helps it do that really effectively, to give us the tools to be even better at this job.
That's true. And I liked how you said earlier about, you have to be focused on, the dopamine hits. And I think that you were referring to, and if I'm not, please correct me, but I think you were referring to the bings and the dings, and, you got another message, and, boop, boop, and all those different things. And I think it's really good that we can empower ourselves to modify our settings to what works for us and what doesn't work for us. Maybe we don't want to have, a push notification and a bell and a this and a that. It's good that we can set that. And for this live, I turned off my notifications because I don't want to hear them. So I think sometimes we have to step forward and we can drive this thing called LinkedIn and make it work for us.
And that's really interesting, because that makes me think about the feed itself, because the feed itself, yes, you can gradually train it to what you want to do, but it's a long, hard process, and weird things seem to happen from time to time, doesn't it, in terms of what you get served up. We need to have ads because that's part of the revenue model, but it's also, we want to see the people we actually want to follow. And it feels like, particularly from a neurodiversity point of view, that not being able to customize that a bit more is really unhelpful.
Mm,
And I think it's enough to put people off. I mean, I know people who've come away from the platform from overwhelm and stuff like that, and that needn't be the case, because actually their businesses absolutely need LinkedIn, because it's a great way to connect with their audience. Their audience is here, but just being able to control that a bit in a sensible way, with some sensible filtering of some description, not to detract from the commercial model, but to give you greater control over what you're actually going to see, would be great, I think,
mm.
in terms of dealing with some of those tricky bits.
Yes, yes. And I would think too, it's always good to be coming on the platform, really being intentional about who do
Mm,
you want to interact with,
mhm.
because it can be very, you can very quickly overwhelm yourself with responding to every connection request. And, you need to go and look and do your homework and say, do I really
Mhm.
want to see that person's content in my feed? It has nothing,
Yeah,
is it really going to be for my betterment, or is this going to be a distraction for me? Is this kind of the content I want in my brain, in my head?
yeah,
And really filtering out. And if you've already got a large network and you're just like, okay, I have 10,000 connections, maybe you got to look at like trimming some of that down, because it's like a jungle, right? It's like your backyard when the weeds get crazy and you're like, I don't see the flowers anymore. You got to go
yeah.
and
I think that's it. And the problem is, I mean, one of the issues as well is the gamification of the platform. It kind of drives you to that. I'm doing well when I get more connections. I'm doing well when I get more followers. But as we all know, you don't need many friends to make a business.
no.
You don't need many at all. I mean, I don't know how many clients you've got at the moment, Julian, but I probably don't operate on more than, I don't know, 10, 15, maybe 20, people that you're kind of actually actively engaged with, who are spending money with you on a regular basis. That's not 10,000.
No.
But you might need double that or triple that to kind of cultivate that. But it's thinking about who you're talking to and why you're talking to. And this is the other, I think, like you said there, with this space, being really clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think really helps with people that think differently, because it allows you to focus in on what your offer is. It allows you to be clear about what you're doing, and it allows you to make a choice about not having to do the other stuff. But unfortunately, some of those things drive you to do things that maybe aren't helpful for your business or yourself.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I agree. And I know a lot of people can get kind of sucked down the rabbit hole of the vanity posts, and
Mm,
you post something and people love it, and then you begin
yeah,
to go, I like that they love it. And so then I'll
yeah,
throw out
yeah,
another post, and then you're going, but is it really moving my business forward, or am I just
yeah,
going for, I really just like that dopamine hit of like, oh, I want the
yeah.
viral post. And yet everyone who, I've actually never had a viral post, but everyone who, lucky me, I really think I'm lucky, because
You've been
everyone who's,
saved.
yeah, I've been saved, because everyone who says that they did have a post that went viral, we
Mm,
think that's what you would like, but they said it's exhausting, that
yeah.
it's like the comments you get, the trolls you get, and it's like,
Mm,
so maybe we just really want to be more authentic. Going back to how you began at the beginning, it's
yeah,
about being a human. So we're just out there looking for other humans, having
yeah,
conversations. And I,
yeah,
like you, Nathan, I started by getting on this platform and being a consumer. I just
yeah,
read, I just looked at the post, I looked at the people, and it's kind of like going into a room at a party. Are you
yeah,
the one that jumps in the middle of the room and says, hi, I'm here, and da da da? Or are
yeah,
you the person that walks in the door and just says, maybe I'll just kind of check out who's all here before I move forward? So it's your
yeah.
choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that thing about choice is really important, because I don't think it's clear that you really have choices when you first get onto the platform.
Mm,
You sort of learn that as you go, that you don't need to use every feature. You don't need to do everything. But what I think is really important is you need to learn what is you and what's useful for your potential audience, or the audience you would like, and then really play into that and experiment and have fun
mm.
in a safe way, because ultimately LinkedIn's getting more and more crowded,
Yes.
but it's not crowded with humans,
Mm.
is it?
No,
It's crowded with
it's
all sorts of other stuff. So actually, and this is, and there's a whole conversation about AI as well, because actually what makes us human is what makes us unique and brilliant. yes, we can scale that with lots of technology and stuff like that, but ultimately people buy from people.
Mm. I
So
love
be
that.
yourself.
I love that. And I truly believe that in a world of AI, the humans are sticking out. Like we
Yeah.
find each other. We're just like, I feel like our little heads pop up and like, oh, there's another human. And then we yay, we find each other. And then you go and now there's 3 of us. And it's like, we're all just going to find each other. So just kind of continue being that human, pop up above the noise and just wave to the other humans and just, it's human to human marketing. That's the kick. I love it.
Yeah.
I love
Definitely.
that. So we've reached the end of our 30 minutes. Nathan, is there any sort of last words of wisdom you'd want to leave us with today before we say goodbye?
I'd just say, yeah, if neurodiversity is a big thing for you, and I know it is for lots of us, I think LinkedIn can be a useful space, but treat it as the tool it's designed to be, and think carefully about how you use the platform, and be clear about what you want to achieve from it. I think that's probably the most important thing.
I love that. Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. Thank you for everybody who's joined us and will be catching us later on the podcast. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.